am a product manager for Recidiviz, which is basically a technical nonprofit that works on creating a data platform for criminal justice reform. So I'm looking forward to diving into that with everyone.
Louisa?
Hi, my name's Louisa, she, her. I currently am an analyst at change.org, which is the petition website. Most of you have probably been spammed by petitions on Facebook before when your friends share them. I only just started that job exactly 2 months ago. Before that, I was the deputy data director of Andrew Yang's presidential campaign. And before that, I was doing research at the Federal Reserve, also in DC. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. And last but not least, Phoebe.
Thanks, Katie, and thanks everyone here for joining as well. My name is Phoebe. I'm currently a designer at Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, or CZI. They are the philanthropy that is funded by Priscilla Chan and Mark Zuckerberg. And we have 3 verticals of work: education, justice and opportunity, and science. So I work in the education vertical, so I can speak to that the most. Specifically, my work supports teachers in their day-to-day so that they can focus on providing the appropriate supports for their students. I also, prior to that, I was a grad student at Harvard, and my research was in AI education for K-12.
Thank you, Phoebe. All right, so let's just get right into the panel. First question that I wanted to ask is, how and why did you get into social good? Like, why are you passionate about it? Rachel, do you want to start?
Sure. So I was very into government in high school, which I know makes me very cool. I did a lot of work on the local and state level and was very passionate about policy. I entered college thinking I was going to actually be a political science major, but ended up kind of finding my poli-sci theory classes a little bit boring. I really enjoyed the actual aspects of doing the work and didn't necessarily see myself writing policy proposals for my future. And so at the same time, I was taking a computer science course. Really loved that I could build something, create something, and figured there has to be a way to combine these two things. And so I was right, but I was also a little bit wrong in the sense that it was very difficult to find internships that had social impact kind of lenses. But I was lucky enough to end up at a digital strategy firm that did work for local and state campaigns. So I did that for a bit. Then the next summer, I found myself in Washington, D.C., doing that on the national level for senatorial and gubernatorial candidates. And then 2016 happened, and I thought, politics is becoming a lot. Maybe I should look at different ways to explore this field. And kind of thought, well, I've done a lot of government work. Politics is kind of a natural fit within that, and ended up finding this wonderful program called the Civic Digital Fellowship, which a few of my friends had actually just launched as students themselves because they wanted to fill this void of internships that didn't really exist. And so I spent my summer in Washington, D.C. building products for the U.S. Census Bureau, which I know is another hot button issue right now. Really fell in love with it and ended up staying on with the team because I really just believed in the mission and have been doing it pretty much ever since. So that's kind of my life story in a nutshell.
Nice, glad to hear that. All right, we'll just pass it on to Humphrey. Would you like to talk?
Yeah. And so for me, so in college, I went to Harvard, graduated 2018 in bioengineering computer science, and was very much involved in sort of like the tech and design realm and entrepreneurship within the sort of Boston tech and entrepreneurship scene. And so I think I'd helped organize Hack Harvard. I'd done a bunch of random agency stuff. And so I was very much in that realm, but had very little there was very little focused application in some sense. And so when I graduated, I think there were like two major shifts that happened. I think one of which was kind of diving into misinformation. And so this was just kind of like a side interest of mine that I felt like would be a really interesting thing to like dig into more. And so got involved with a few like organizations like Credibility Coalition, working on basically just doing a lot of like UX and like strategy and theorizing around like theorizing around like the human factors related to misinformation. And also, as I think many people sort of have this kind of like existential crisis of like, I'm doing tech, but like, what am I building things for? Or like, is tech evil? Like doing all of these like general like machinations and whatever. And so I was doing a lot of reading basically, and just like educating myself about like basically the intersection between technology, social justice, the pillars of our democracy, etc. And so at this point, I kind of consider my like main sort of like focus area and like the thing that I think is pretty much like the most meaningful thing for me to work on is basically technology that supports a healthy, like well-functioning democracy. And so that's basically what got me like very much into public interest technology. And so it made a switch from working at Google, which is what I did for the first 2 years of my like post-grad career, into working at this like the smaller smaller nonprofit startup that works on criminal justice reform. And here I'm doing very much the intersection of a lot of my interests, basically working on public data. So like basically opening more data up to public stakeholders and also encouraging members of the criminal justice ecosystem to actually collaborate with one another, like using data. And so, yeah, that is basically my story.
Nice. It's great to hear that you kind of pivoted from like Harvard into like more like social good and everything about like tech and social justice. Really happy to hear that. All right, let's move on. So Louisa.
Yeah, so I'll kind of interpret the question as like why social good instead of the more traditional paths, because most of my friends who went into tech, you know, work at FANG or something similar. And basically, like I wasn't a CS major in college or anything. I majored in Arabic and then took an econ class I really liked. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to major in, and I loved my econ class. So when I was like having trouble finding a job, I convinced a professor to let me RA for them one summer. And I just loved doing research. I loved the statistical programming I was doing in state and art. I loved the kind of like mix of analysis with like human-centered thinking. But at the same time, like Humphrey took the like words out of my mouth, like definitely was having an existential crisis, which probably most people on this call are having, of like, what should I do with my life? And like, also, what is the point of life anyway? And I kind of realized that like those two things could go together. Like, I think a pretty valid answer to what is the point of life, or like, why are we here, is like, well, we might as well help each other out, like make the world a better place, as cliche as it is. And I found something called effective altruism, which is like a philosophical approach. It's not like this isn't a cult or anything. It's just like if you've taken a philosophy class, you might have heard of EA. And it was kind of like invented by this Australian philosopher who I think teaches at Princeton, named Peter Singer. And it basically argues that like we have a moral obligation to do good in society, and we might as well like do it in the most effective possible way. And I was like all on the EA train. And part of EA, like a logical extension of that, is like, if you're gonna have to work a job anyway, which like most of us probably do, like most of us are not trust fund kids here, I'm guessing. So like, if you need to work 40 hours a week anyway to like live, you might as well like turn that into time that you spend on something that helps the world. And I discovered this website called 80,000 Hours, which talks a lot about that. I'm seeing head nods from some of the other panelists. And that totally like put me down the path of like, I'm going to do a career that does good. And since I liked the econ research I was doing on welfare and the social safety net, I was like, okay, I'll get my PhD in econ. Lets me kind of code with a practical angle on it. And so that's how I decided to go to the Fed, was then to like eventually get my PhD in econ. I didn't end up doing that, but like the idea of effective altruism is still what kind of drives me to this day.
I'm sorry if I missed it. What is EA?
Effective altruism. So this idea that you like want to do good in the most effective way.
Mm-hmm. Got it. It's interesting to hear that you first like majored in Arabic. All right, Phoebe.
I thought of it on the similar lines of Louisa. Like, I obviously hear people on this call. All of us want to, at some extent, want to have a positive impact on society. So, at least for me, it was more of a question of how can I do that through my interests. And I think in the beginning it was, I started I think undergrad for me was a while ago, but I spent half of my undergrad wanting to be pre-med, and then I ended up pivoting to computer science. And then at the same time, I knew I enjoyed learning, and I was fascinated by the way that people learn. So in the beginning, it was just like an inkling, like, okay, maybe education seems a place for me. Oh, my father is so. And kind of finding the intersection. So education and technology, so ed tech seemed like the right place to kind of head into. And just like as I worked more and more in education, it's just like you just start seeing more issues that you want to have an impact on. So like seeing some of them that are systemic and complex, but also some that can be mitigated by technology, and just like finding a place where your interests intersect.
That's great. Okay, sorry for that interruption. Trying to mute. All right. So to move on to our following question, we kind of wanted to like delve more into like what kind of work you're doing at your organization, like what is your organization like super passionate about, and what makes you super excited to just work there. So I guess, well, let's start in the opposite direction. Phoebe, so in what ways have you and or your organization like worked to help advance social good?
Yeah, so I can talk about like kind of what CZI does, and also like what my like side projects are. So at CZI, again, there are 3 verticals, but in education, which is the one that I work on, our vision is for a K-12 education system to be one where demographics like race and socioeconomic status are not predictive of student outcomes. And that's kind of like our North Star. And we also want children to enter adulthood with not only like, the academic knowledge and content knowledge, but also like the skills and habits and the agency that they need to be successful after their collegiate education. So our theory of change is to provide like equitable and consistent support for students to meet both their academic and non-academic needs. So we're kind of like, the thing that I am really passionate about that aligns with CZI is that we look at students and children as like a whole child. Like we care about not only their academic progress, but also their emotional and physical and just holistic well-being. So that's something that aligns. And then just like briefly about their other verticals, like justice and opportunity, I know a little bit. We invest heavily in initiatives that support like decarceration and giving people second chances. And so we just support like policy and ballot measures that are aligned with our work. And then for my personal projects, my goals are to kind of democratize access to AI education. So I'm trying to like better understand how to like engage and effectively teach students what is AI and the capabilities and limitations of AI, and also the ethics of AI, given that like AI is becoming increasingly widespread in our society.
Yeah. I apologize again for any discussions that are going on right now.
No worries.
We're trying to modify it.
No worries, that's just 2020. That's just how it works.
Yeah, zoom on. Well, Louisa, do you want to answer this question as well?
Yeah, sure. So since I've only worked for Change.org for 2 months, they do great work, but I think I'll talk about Yang because also that's generally what I get more questions about in my life anyway. And I think it's a somewhat like different perspective. So I think the question was like, what have I done to advance social good? Which I really, I think that's quite interesting. Like, what tangible thing have I done is almost what it pressed me to do. Because, and like, what can we do? For me, the biggest thing was, I think that by quitting my job at the Fed and going to be a data analyst at Yang, and then eventually getting promoted to being like a deputy director there who was making a lot of decisions around analytics, voter targeting, fundraising decisions, outreach decisions. I like to think that, and I think I did actively advance the like understanding of UBI in society, which I hope like will have a long-term effect. Obviously, we didn't do that well. You don't have $10,000 a month or $1,000 a month in your account yet. But I actually think that if Yang hadn't had as much success as he did, and therefore like people hadn't heard so much about UBI, I don't think we would have gotten the stimulus check that we got. I think that was so front of mind for people because I really credit that Andrew Yang with that he had been giving this idea of like, we can just give people money, like that works. And I think that's why policymakers reached for that so quickly. And so I'd like to think I had like a small part. Would it have probably happened without me? Yeah, but like I contributed, I think, by pushing UBI. And then like another kind of like maybe unexpected answer is that like the biggest impact I think maybe I've had in the world is actually just by donating. That sounds kind of silly because I was just plugging like use your career. But part of a career in tech is like we get paid well in most tech jobs, not all, but many. And like there's this organization called GiveWell that like really carefully quantifies like how much it costs to save a life. And by donating just a little bit through them every month, like I have saved a human life from malaria. That's like the most cost-effective way to do it, which sounds crazy because like all I do is send them a check every month. It's not even that much money. But like that, I thought that was kind of like an interesting, like you can save a life with like not even that much money, which is kind of a cool thing and maybe a hot take from just like, oh, what did I do with my job?
Mm-hmm. Well, out of curiosity on GiveWell, how much does it take?
Yeah, their general number is around $3,300. And that's a kind of conservative, that's like to guarantee you've saved a life. You might have heard that like a malaria net costs $10, so you can save a life with $10, but it's not really true because like that person wouldn't necessarily have died. Sorry to be so morbid to anyone on the call. So like that's kind of the number for like to kind of guarantee you've saved a life is $3,300. That's the most recent one I've heard. Mm-hmm. I don't give that just to be clear, like I'm not making that much money. Like over time, I have like made giving a priority.
Yeah. And in terms of like the UBI, you're right, like the stimulus check. I also agree that like we probably got it from Andrew Yang's campaign. So do you strongly believe that we should have like a universal UBI in the future?
Yeah, but you have to pay for it. So like you couldn't just implement UBI. I think you need a VAT tax and you need to like you need to make people have to choose between UBI or like another safety net option. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I do, especially because I'm guessing we'll talk about like the future of tech, and I think the future of tech is automation, and I think we need UBI as like one of the strongest options to help people through that.
Definitely. Okay. Humphrey.
Yep, I can go. And so I'll speak mostly about Recidiviz. I similarly, since I made my move relatively soon, like I think there's still like a lot more that I'm still learning, like basically every single day. But with Recidiviz, our main theory of change is by basically filling in a lot of the sort of data analysis and like data sharing capacity that most like Department of Corrections, in other words, the people who sort of control prisons and supervision within a given state, simply like do not have the resources to be able to actually dream up like or do that analysis on what a decarcerative future might look like. Because ultimately, as I'm sure everyone has become much more aware of in the past few months, prisons are shit and we shouldn't have them. But anyway, I think going into that like in a little bit more detail, I think a lot of what we do is actually like work directly with those government partners. In other words, people within the Department of Correction, to ingest their data, clean it up, organize it, and be able to put it back to them in ways that actually give them a lot more of a direct sense of exactly like how many people are like currently in prison, how has that number changed over time, why are people being revoked back to prison, like, and being able to actually set goals around these things as opposed to just sort of like do things at a drop of a hat. And so that is a lot of like what we generally do. What I work on specifically, again, is with public data. And so one thing that I launched relatively recently, like a couple weeks ago, months ago, I don't know, was basically the North Dakota public dashboard. So North Dakota being one of the first states that we've worked with, designed and shipped a like public dashboard that answers a lot of key questions around the like Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, in other words, like prison supervision, and also gives a breakdown of the racial disparities within the state. Moving forward, I think a lot of what I'll be working on within this public data realm is still working a lot across all of those other public stakeholders, like advocacy groups, researchers, et cetera, and being able to actually provide them the data that they need to be able to do their work, whether it's being able to make a case for a given policy, or simply like do the research necessary in order to like understand alternate futures, understand the depth of problems, et cetera. And then also still working within the government to actually encourage more data sharing and coordination amongst all of those different partners. And so that is basically like my job and like how that sort of like goes towards the social good aspect. And then one thing that I'll just generally plug for everyone to consider is just getting involved in organizing, like community organizing. I think a lot of the tools that we actually build up in tech, whether that's organizational tools or actual like technology, actually can play a pretty big role in making sure that like a lot of like grassroots efforts can actually like operate effectively and meet their goals. And so me being very much a big advocate of sort of community-driven design, community-centered design, like just doing things from the bottom up, I think that's actually a really important way that you can actually stay directly involved in the things that matter. Because also like local politics, local community efforts, like all of those things probably have like an outsized effect on the lived experiences of the people around you. And so getting involved with that, I think, is like incredibly important. So for me personally, I volunteer with the Democratic Socialists of America within SF, and specifically co-chair the like Afro-Socialist Committee. So
yeah, I agree. Do you have any tips for participants on like how to get started
on community organizing? Yeah, I mean, like honestly, just find like the causes that you care about. Think about the causes you care about. Think about like the ideologies that you sort of like align with. There are probably like things that directly related to that like you can just kind of like contact those organizations, see if they need help, or on like honestly, like there's probably a DSA chapter within like not to push my specific ideology or anything like that, but like that's one way they can also sort of like just get tapped in and get involved. It doesn't really have to be like a technical role even, although the skills that we build up can and should definitely be used towards those aims. I think even just like being able to volunteer your time and like your perspectives can definitely also be really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll definitely keep that in mind for myself too. All right, Rachel.
Yeah, so as I alluded to earlier, Cutting It Forward is an organization that builds opportunities and pathways. So essentially what that means is jobs and internships, as well as funding opportunities for students like yourself. So I mentioned that I was part of a program called the Civic Digital Fellowship. That was our first ever offering that we had as an organization, where students going to spend the summer, generally speaking, over the course of 10 weeks working for a federal agency on an important product or service in service of the American people. So it's really a phenomenal chance to learn about what these systems look like from the inside. Most people don't realize this, but only 3% of the federal technology workforce is under the age of 30. that is a number that should be terrifying to everyone on this call, because our workforce is aging at a rate where we will not have people to replace them. And if our government systems start falling apart, which I'm sure you've seen in the past few months in the news, with unemployment insurance, people needing to apply for food stamps, all that kind of basic everyday necessities, those things are not going to last unless we have technologists who are able to keep them updated, current, and usable for folks. So bringing people into public service was kind of our first goal as an organization. To date, we've had over 160 students go through our programs in the last 3 years. So those are 160 internships that didn't exist before 2017, which I think is pretty cool. But we realized we had to do more, because for those 160 spots, we probably heard from 4,000 students saying, I want to do this job, which is a lot of people. And we don't want to turn anyone away who wants a social impact career, because I truly, honestly believe that we need every single one of you to make this world and this country function more efficiently and more effectively. So what we decided to do was we launched another program, which instead of an internship, it's actually a funding opportunity in partnership with Schmidt Futures, which is another philanthropy. Similar to Chan Zuckerberg, it was founded by Eric Schmidt, who's the former CEO of Google, and really takes big bets on people with interesting technology ideas to help save the future of humanity. And so we give $10,000 grants to anyone under the age of 25, no educational requirements, no schooling backgrounds, no citizenship requirements. And we essentially give them $10,000, no strings attached, to pursue their ideas. We've funded a high school student in Australia who's building smart sensors for rural cattle farmers who don't have internet access. We have funded people in the United States who are working on recidivism issues, so sending text reminders for court dates, other important meetings that are very easy to forget about if you don't have access to a computer, but lots of people have access to cell phones. Really just kind of intuitive solutions like that our team thought were scalable and important uses of technology that deserve to be funded and at least tested out as an idea. So that's another way we're trying to create opportunities for young people. And then the final way, which is actually something we just announced last week, is a new program called the Impact Fellowship. It is a year-long paid opportunity for students to work as technologists for social impact orgs. So Humphrey's organization, Recidiviz, actually has 2 of our impact fellows are working there as a product manager and data scientist, respectively. We've also placed folks at UN Global Pulse, Code for America, and some other organizations as well. And the idea is that we're empowering these nonprofits to essentially hire entry-level talent, make it really easy for them to do so that they don't have to rethink their entire recruiting processes, and also give them the funding and leverage to be able to hire, since we recognize that's always a big barrier for the social impact sector. Is, I believe Louisa mentioned before, we typically think of tech jobs as high paying, but the reality is that the social impact sector does not have unlimited funds coming in like FANG companies. And so thinking about ways to still make it equitable as a career choice, since I recognize that many people do rely on the money that they make from their jobs to live their day-to-day lives. So that was the idea behind Impact Fellows, was how can we make an opportunity that's as attractive as going to work for a Google or a Facebook straight out of college, but instead take you right into the social impact sector and hope that you stay. So those are a few of our different programs. Altogether, we also have a Facebook group and a newsletter, which are really awesome. I don't say that because I feel like we need more subscribers or anything like that, but truly it is a resource that our team publishes. It goes out every 2 weeks. It's absolutely free. There's no commitment, but we do post jobs and internships there as well that are all focused in social impact sectors. So if you are currently on the hunt, either now or in the future, definitely would recommend taking a look at that. We feature positions all over the country and world, which I definitely recommend checking out. So that is how we are focused on creating social good.
Yeah, that's a great insight. The Civic Digital Fellowship and like the Impact Fellowships, that sounds amazing. And also like the 3% statistic, that's really scary to think about. So you and Louisa both mentioned that like a lot of students are going towards like FANG or like high paying jobs. So a question from Mohib, one of our participants, is like a lot of students are coming from, or many students who come from low income backgrounds strive to get high paying jobs, whether it's like meant to be meaningful or helpful to the world. And they almost have to deprioritize like doing good. Do you have any words of wisdom that you can pass on to them?
Yeah, I would say first, don't automatically assume that all impact jobs are low paying. There are actually many great organizations out there that pay fair wages and competitive wages. So would definitely recommend doing some research before just writing off social impact opportunities in their entirety, because I know that many of the organizations we've mentioned on this call do pay very fair and competitive wages to their employees. So step one, definitely check that out. Step two is, I would say, like, if you can't swing it at first, that's totally fine. The first few years of your career are not your entire life. If you go and work for a big tech company in the beginning, which again, folks on this call have done, and I know many people who are fellows and in our community as well who have also done that, that's totally fine. I think there's been a few great suggestions for how you can create impact in your life, whether that is volunteering, organizing, donating, etc. Your job does not need to define you and be your entire life. If it has to be a 9 to 5 to make ends meet, that's okay. But there are other ways in your life to create social impact as well. So I think that's a totally valid concern, and definitely understand the need to make ends meet. Of course, with that being said, if you are working for a big tech company, there are ways to organize within your tech company and push them and challenge them. Humphrey's giving a thumbs up. I can't speak to that personally, but I know that in the news there's been quite a lot of chatter about organizing internally. So that's another way to think about it as well. But I'll let folks who maybe have more experience in the actual private industry sector speak to that too.
I wanted to quickly say I agreed with basically all of that. Yeah, some jobs pay well. I work for a B Corp instead of a nonprofit. So like it's a for-profit company that's aimed at doing social good. They pay not as well as I would make at Google, but perfectly well. I live in New York City. And I'm really curious what Humphrey thinks about this question, having come from Google.
Yeah, definitely. So again, also +1, agree with everything everyone else said. I'd say I went to Google partially because I didn't know exactly like what I wanted to focus on, but also because I had loans to pay off. So I was like, yeah, like I don't really have the time, space, the luxury, I suppose, of being able to like just kind of like choose anything else. I mean, like there were definitely other options, I suppose, but with regards to like the doing social impact within a private company as well, I think sometimes you can find your way onto a team that like is doing something that is like in that general realm. I mean, like when you're talking about like these like super large tech companies, like it's not always going to be like fully like aligned in like how it does the thing. But you can sometimes find like options within larger tech companies that do that. And also, even if you're not directly working on something that like the thing itself is like the thing itself is like is geared towards social impact, the way that you do it still also matters. And so like, for example, making sure that you're advocating for like advocating for ethics like within your own team, advocating for like data privacy, etc. And then obviously, as Rachel I think also mentioned, organizing within your company is something that I think is also very important, and something that more people should do in general. I think just being able to take a stand for what you believe is right within your own company, and especially where it's most relevant, although obviously it applies at like many different levels for corporations, where it's most relevant is going to be like in these large companies where like you are like there are many layers of abstraction away from power in some sense. And so being able to organize collectively on the, or like amongst the employees and actually like stand for what you believe is right is actually really important. And so whether that's like, I think back when I was at Google, participated in like one of the like there was a group of Googlers who had participated in the sort of like climate march in San Francisco. There was the like walkout against like all of the like findings that came out around like sexual harassment at Google. So like there are lots of things like that that you can also sort of just make sure you're keeping in mind even as you are in a large tech company.
Yeah, I don't have that much to add, but just to close it out, I agree. Like your 9 to 5 doesn't define you, and you can have social impact. You can find ways to have social impact outside of work, whether it is donating money or volunteering. And then once you're in a position, you can kind of have social impact in your daily work, then you can kind of move into that later. And I agree with what Humphrey said about the way that you do it matters. So a lot of it is the process.
Yeah, definitely. So shifting our focus a little bit, right now, obviously like COVID-19 has definitely like disrupted the way we work, the way we like go to school and take classes. So how has COVID changed the way you think about social good? Like how's it shifted your focus, and like what your organization is doing or like what you are prioritizing?
I can give a quick answer first, while other people think of like at their orgs. My short answer is it's made me really think about long-termism more, which is like the idea of how much should we weight future generations versus ourselves. I had always thought that social good meant I wanted to work only on problems that were affecting current people, but COVID has really made me realize that like if all of humanity suffers from, you know, a pandemic, nuclear issues, climate change, like that has a huge impact. And it's made me question whether I should be spending more of my time on short-term issues or long-term. And I don't have an answer yet. So that's why it's a short answer.
I can go next. I think COVID has definitely revealed a lot of existing inequities and has also further exacerbated them. But there are also silver linings. So in terms of education at CZI, like we're seeing the gap between the privileged and the marginalized widening. So some kids, you know, they don't have internet at home or a safe environment to learn in, and that makes prioritizing education hard. And it's also hard on teachers. So like teaching online is really hard. Like imagine like getting 20 kindergartners trying to pay attention to you while sitting in front of a computer screen for 2 hours straight. It's like impossible. So I think like the silver lining though is it has sped up some of our decisions. For example, like to make things asynchronous. So like before COVID, CZI would have these large in-person professional development trainings for teachers. And now all of that is online. So that means like more teachers are able to access it. So especially those who would have missed trainings otherwise. So in that sense, it has increased the accessibility for teachers. But we are certainly like strategy-wise, we are pivoting to kind of address some of the inequities that COVID has revealed.
I can speak to coding it forward. So, I mean, first, it kind of obviously ruined our plans for an in-person internship, considering that what we do best is bringing people together for job placements. Obviously, that was no longer possible. So we actually pivoted and built our first ever remote program, which happened in a span of about 3 weeks. I don't think our team slept a lot, but it was actually an awesome experience. We did the same pre and post survey that we do with our traditional interns and scored just as highly on all the variables that we measure as part of our program. So that was really cool to actually learn that we could be successful doing an internship program remotely, because I think both from an organizational perspective, but I think also thinking of the students, we were all a little bit terrified to see what would happen. But it was really great to be able to still provide that opportunity, since I recognize that a lot of folks had their internship offers pulled, a lot of things kind of went down the toilet, for lack of a better phrase, during this time. The other thing we're doing, which I'm really excited about, is we're offering our first ever semester time program. So we kind of started realizing towards the end of July that we were hearing a lot of chatter from our current students that they didn't want to go back to university if it was going to be paying for Zoom education. And I totally understand that. Like Humphrey, I have student loans. I do not blame you for not wanting to pay for online instruction, especially if you are, attending a university that is traditionally in person. And so we were thinking like, hey, what can we offer these students to do with their time? Like help them make some money and, still stay at home and be productive and feel like they're accomplishing something and learning something. So we launched the fall iteration of our program, which is actually going live in 2 weeks. I see 1 or 2 of the fall fellows actually on this call, which is kind of fun. But really excited to welcome all of them. There's going to be 39 students in total we're working with. So those are 2 of the main ways that we've pivoted as an organization. I think we've been very fortunate in the fact that we were able to think nimbly. We're a 3-person team, and I recognize that gives us a lot of agility that other organizations don't have. But we're also thankful to be working in a sector like the government that has a lot of funding, which I also recognize is a problem for other social impact organizations during this time. So we were very fortunate in that regard to have some stability and to have programs that still desperately need us, because the census happens, pandemic or no pandemic. So that's kind of how we've transitioned.
And then for me personally, let's see, with Recidiviz first, I think when COVID hit, one of the major things to consider, I suppose, is that prisons, or like anyone who is sort of incarcerated, they're generally in a closed space close to many people. So that is generally a problem, and especially given the fact that or incarcerated populations in general are disproportionately represent Black and Brown people. I was like, okay, like we need to definitely figure this out. And so one of the things that Recidiviz did, honestly, like before I even got there, was actually start producing a COVID-19 model that would kind of help to predict the like population projections and like the general impact of COVID-19 in prisons, like given certain measures that one might put in place. And so that is a tool that I think most, at least one like agency or department in every state is using at this point, to kind of help like figure out the potential impact and like of like certain measures and policies and things like that. Other than that, honestly, like our mission is pretty like evergreen regardless of the situation at hand. And so I think that the core work that we do has not shifted much beyond that. And then existentially, I suppose, as far as like a personal thing, I do think that COVID definitely brought up the question of like, okay, like what should I actually, or like when is a good time to make these decisions? Because I made a job switch like during COVID, and I realized like, yeah, there's like could die at any moment, might as well do something that I actually care about. So I think that was very much like a personal shift that kind of happened. It was already a long time coming, but it was kind of like and put things into perspective in some sense.
Yeah. So given that we have about like 10 minutes left, if any participants have questions, like feel free to put them in the event Q&A chat. We'll be checking that. In the meantime, though, I did really want to ask. So all of you have mentioned a lot of different organizations, like websites, and just like different initiatives. So what do you like hope will happen like the next 3 to 5 years? Like, are there any companies or initiatives you think are doing like incredible work right now, but maybe haven't gotten enough like exposure or press? What do you hope to see in like the next 3 to 5 years, essentially?
I can start.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Here's like, this is just like my take. Do not represent CZI on this. So today, I think, you know, we're kind of experiencing this reckoning of like addressing all of the inequities of society and like acknowledging that they exist. What I hope to see, not like saying any particular company, but like I just hope that people in the future will say like that's not enough, like it's not sufficient to just acknowledge it, but we need to like push organizations and, you know, teams of people to like develop an actionable plan to address them. And I'm hoping that like people will kind of hold themselves accountable to their kind of missions and like other mission driven metrics and stuff.
It's interesting thinking about like next 3 to 5 years. I'm not sure if like I would expect like major shifts in that time, but as far as like like things that I personally care about that I would want to see progress in the next like maybe like 10 years or so. One would just be like more community-driven, like community-driven like solutions, like studios, like just things like more oriented around like local communities and things like that, and like giving them the agency to like design solutions that work for them. There's a really good framework called Design Justice that I would definitely encourage people to like check out and like actually like read about, where typical design pedagogies around like design thinking, human-centered design, etc., might not go far enough, honestly. And we're also like designed under a very like designed within the same sort of tradition of design that's still like within a capitalist system and like all of this other stuff. So like thinking about alternate like design methodologies, I think that's like one of the major things I would want to see like push forward and actually executed upon in the next like 5 to 10 years. And then other than that, I think I always will still care about like misinformation and civic discourse. And so thinking about ways that we can build technology and policies, etc., to actually make progress in that realm and like actually get effective platform governance. So that's like a kind of thing that I would want to see.
Just a quick +1. Humphrey, I also recommend checking out asset-based design. I think that might be interesting. It's also like a community approach to design.
What was the first one called again that you mentioned, Humphrey?
Oh, the first one was Design Justice.
Design Justice.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you look up like the Design Justice Network, like that will probably have like some sort of like information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll add really quickly while we're on this topic that Design Justice actually just became open access. So it should be readable for everyone on this call online. While we're on the subject, figured I'd mention it. In terms of the next few years, I mean, I think the biggest thing I've learned in this space is that patience is a virtue. Things do not happen overnight as much as I wish they did. And a lot of the problems that we've talked about on this call, recidivism and prison reform, education, public interest technology, those are really big problems that people have been working on for decades, if not hundreds of years. And I think that as technologists, we have to approach these issues with a lot of humility because frankly, code is not going to solve our societal inequities. And yeah, I don't think there's an algorithm or like a secret button or something that's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years that's like truly systemically going to like shake things up. But I think that the most important reality is just like continuing on the path of this conversation, right? That it takes literally all of us thinking about these issues and contributing our minds to them to move them forward. I think it's also important to remember, particularly in today's society, to not give up when the going gets tough, because it's really easy to think, well, the world around me is a dumpster fire and I don't feel like anything's actually getting accomplished. But if we don't have people at least pushing back on that assumption or trying to move things forward via baby steps, then we're just going to move backwards. So I think that's also an important framework and idea to keep in mind. I think my big goal and dream for the next 10 years would be that every single college student who wants to enter a social impact career can do so the day they graduate, and they can do so for a fair and competitive wage, and they can do so in the field that they are interested in pursuing. So that is a long journey. We still have a ways to go, but I hope that at college career fairs in 10 years, next to the Facebook booth, there are lots of amazing nonprofit organizations and social impact organizations who are doing awesome work and recruiting everyone on this call at the same level that the big tech companies are. I also wish, from more of a user perspective, that every government service we use is as easy as ordering a package on Amazon, for lack of a better analogy. But I think that going to the DMV, applying for healthcare online, unemployment benefits, all that good stuff, should obviously not have a bad reputation. Those are things that every single person in this country need to do on a daily basis. Whether or not we think about our trash getting picked up every morning, that's up to you, whether that's something that bothers you as a system, but it is something that affects all of us, and it needs to be efficient and effective and user-friendly. So there's lots of ways to accomplish that, but my hope is that in 10 years, no one will ever complain about the DMV again, or complain about applying for unemployment insurance, or any of the millions of other things they have to do with the government. So that's a big, audacious goal, which I recognize, but if you're asking me, that is also my dream.
I'm hoping for that too.
Yeah, huge +1. The road for education is like 100 years, not 10.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with 3 minutes left, we did have a question on from AS. So how would you suggest someone to start with like social good, especially like completely from scratch in a country where there might not be a lot of organizations and resources for social good, and for Humphrey, like especially in the prison sector?
My advice, I want somebody to say something concrete after me because this is going to be a little vague. So somebody else think of something really concrete. But big picture, like regardless of where you are, my advice is actually don't put social good first. Put what interests you first. You might hear the word passion, but it's like really hard to figure out what your passion is. Like I don't know that anyone else in this call, like what is a passion? That's a huge, like, whoever figures out a life calling, that's too big. But like just things that interest you. Like don't pick the job that you think is most like this has the biggest impact. Pick the job that's most interesting. Like if you love video games, like start by learning Swift and like coding a little iOS app and releasing that on the App Store, and like then try to get an iOS job because that's just what you're passionate is. And then like, yeah, that's not a social good job, but like maybe the next app you develop will be one that like helps, helps connect families of people in prison to help them organize better or something like that, but start with where the passion is. Like that was just a super random example, but like don't shoehorn your way in and feel like you have to start with the social good or like people said, like sacrificing money or anything like that. Just start with what's interesting today to you.
Yeah, I would definitely +1 that. I don't think I specifically was like trying to figure out like, oh, what is like a social good thing that I can do, but rather was just like, I'm very interested in misinformation. Like got that like evolved into an interest in like civic discourse, and then evolved into an interest in like the democratic or like the technological underlyings of our democracy. Like it was like a steady like progression kind of thing. And I think the thing is that like as you dig into these problems, you start realizing like that there's very rarely like there's almost nothing under the sun that does not have some sort of social element to it. And so like no matter what, like once you start like digging into any particular thing that you're interested in, then you will probably start figuring out like, and like when you like really dig into it and like actually approach it from like a very intentional point of view, you'll probably figure out that it has like some perspective of like equity attached, or like some like historical like whatever. Like you can definitely figure those things out as you go along. As far, if you do want to just kind of like try out something that you know is socially impactful, though, then I would say like honestly there are probably like organizations like within your local community that are like need help. Just like go help out with one of those. I'm not, since I went with like the community organizing route and like just kind of found or like knew that DSA existed in SF and was pretty strong here, and like plugged myself in that way. You can do something similar to that, or you can just find like an organization that you think calls out to you and just like see what they need help. But stay local in some sense if you can.
Yeah, agreed with that. Okay, so we are out of time. Phoebe and Rachel, did you have anything to add?
I was just going to say, this is probably the one context where I would say Google is your friend. There are tons of open source initiatives that exist online that are super easy to contribute to. So I think that Louisa and Humphrey both gave really great advice in the sense that you should identify your interests first, but there's probably a social bent to that. And then if you go even a step further, there's probably an open source way to contribute to it. So really, I think using the internet to your advantage, searching for organizations that appeal to you is a great first step. I'd say second, you can also self-educate as a step. I think that's something a lot of people forget about, but there are phenomenal books and resources out there. Design Justice is one that was mentioned on this call. There's also Algorithms of Oppression, Weapons of Mass Destruction. There are so much good literature that exists these days. And I would suggest just starting there too, right? Informing yourself and learning about this field and all the amazing practitioners in it, I think is a great first step as well.
Yeah, and just to close out, agree with what everyone has said. I would say like, just if it's something that you really want, you'll end up there regardless of your journey. And I think it's just like, just get involved, and like you have a unique skill set that you can volunteer, and certainly some social impact organization will be in need of it. So yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much to the panelists for coming to talk to us today. I'm sure our participants like really loved your talk, and yeah, so I hope everyone has a great rest of their weekend, and I'll see you guys at the next event. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Bye.